Yeah. Amsterdam Philharmonic Orchestra. Your tempo today here on CBC Radio 2. Welcome, filling the rest of your morning with classical music. I'm Julie Mizrawa. If you ever get a chance to watch the sunrise over the Grand Canyon, do it. There is nothing like it in the world. Everything is a gold and honey color with rays of pink and orange beaming over sepia-colored rock. If you haven't had this awe-inspiring pleasure, here for you now is Freddie Graffet's musical vision of a sunrise on the Grand Canyon. You can hear the sun's searing heat glimmering its way into a gloriously hot day as your morning of classical sunrises continues here on CBC Radio 2 Tempo. sunrise on the Grand Canyon. Freddie Greffet's Grand Canyon Suite in the hands of Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Have you ever wanted to get lost? Seriously, hop on a plane, get out of Dodge, sit under a tree in an exotic place and just think. That's exactly what Frederick Delius did. He sailed from England to Florida, and he spent some time trying to find himself while sitting in an orange grove and watching the sunrise on the Sunshine State. depiction of daybreak from Frederick Delius' Florida Suite with Charles McCarris and the Welsh National Orchestra. Watching the sunrise is such an elegant experience. On a quiet morning, whether you're watching the sun come up on the Rocky Mountains or on the Rock in St. John's, Newfoundland. Well, here's a musical sunrise by Haydn to fill your kitchen or your studio with warmth and charm and natural elegance. selections from Haydn's Sun Quartet, the Hagen String Quartet in performance, and that rounds out your morning of classical music sunrises. If you have a taste for exotic lands and exotic raven-haired women with caramel skin who know how to spin a good story, stay with Tempo to meet Scheherazade, a complete performance of Rimsky-Korsakov's masterpiece, when Tempo continues here on CBC Radio 2. I'm Julie Nasrallah.
It is June 5th, and this is CBC News. I'm Joe Cummings. As the Senate expense scandal continues, two Senate-related debates are scheduled today for Parliament Hill. In Ottawa, here's the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau.
In the Senate today, they will debate a motion that's been put forward by Marjorie LeBreton. She's the leader of the government in the Senate. This motion will ask for the Auditor General to come in and do a comprehensive audit of Senate expenses. Will it be all 105 senators? Will it just be a sampling? That still isn't clear, but that should become clearer as the debate begins a little later this afternoon. And we do know that most senators are open to having this happen. Now, in the other chamber, in the House of Commons, MPs will be debating an NDP motion a little later, and in that motion what they want to do is suspend all funding to the Senate by Canada Day of this year.
That's the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau in Ottawa. A conference is underway today in Victoria examining the issue of Canadian minorities and the political process. CBC's Lisa Cordasco has the details.
Aboriginal people are the fastest growing segment of Canadian society, but they are rarely concentrated enough to form an effective voting bloc. Political scientist Mike Medeiros says non-contiguous ridings would level the playing field. Currently, Canadian ridings are defined by geographic boundaries. Non-contiguous ridings are created by taking minority groups like Aboriginals from different areas, and together they would make up a new riding. Medeiros says that model would make Canada more democratic.
Fair representation has been shown to increase voter turnout amongst minorities. It's also been shown to bring political issues important to minority groups to the forefront.
Medeiros says there is no legal impediment to creating non-contiguous ridings and no need for constitutional debates. He says it will be up to minority groups to lobby for change. Lisa Cordasco, CBC News, Victoria.
Now to Turkey and that country's growing anti-government unrest. In Istanbul, here's the CBC's Derek Stoffel.
There was more violence once again overnight as protesters clashed with security forces here in Istanbul's Taksim Square. And all this came just hours after Turkey's deputy prime minister tried to cool things down with an apology for the violent response to the demonstrations. There may be a softening of the government line, but the focus is still on the Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who demonstrators accuse of running Turkey with an iron fist. Later today, the Deputy Prime Minister will meet some of the protest organizers, another attempt to defuse the situation. But already many of the people camped out in the square here are dismissing that meeting as little more than a ploy to try to silence the protesters. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Istanbul.
The French government is saying it has evidence confirming that the Syrian military has used chemical weapons in its war with the anti-government rebels. And at the United Nations, the French allegation is being added to a growing list.
There has been credible evidence that in small quantities chemical weapons have been used by the regime in Syria. We have notified a number of incidents to the Secretary General. Most recently, on the 23rd of May, I wrote to the Secretary General and notified 3 further incidents when we believe that chemical weapons may have been used.
That is Mark Lyle Grant, the British ambassador to the UN. All eyes now on Washington and the Obama administration. It has said in the past that the use of chemical weapons in Syria will not be tolerated. We're expecting another story to come out today about drugs in baseball. The founder of a Miami anti-aging clinic has agreed to talk to Major League Baseball about specific players linked to performance-enhancing drugs. The information from the founder of the clinic could lead to suspension.
What's up? Doesn't work?
It does. It's working.
Okay.
Try this.
Elise Doucette also today in Geneva after meeting diplomats from the U.S. and Russia. The UN envoy for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, announced that a peace conference for Syria later this month has now been postponed. Flooding in Central Europe continues as water levels reach record highs. The army has been deployed to the German city of Halle, where soldiers are working around the clock. Close to 10,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. That is your latest CBC News. Remember, we broadcast live and podcast at cbcnews.ca. I'm Carol McDowell.
And now the weather forecast for Toronto and Hamilton tonight. Mainly cloudy, slight chance of showers overnight, the low near 12. Thursday showers, gusty winds from the east in the morning, a high 14. For Niagara, partly cloudy tonight, gusty northeast winds, the low near 13. Thursday showers, windy, a high near 17. And for Peterborough and the Kawarthas tonight, cloudy, slight chance of showers overnight, the low near 9. Thursday cloudy, showers, a high near 12.
You're listening to CBC Radio 2, 90.7 in Kitchener-Waterloo.
Good evening, I'm Rich Turfry. You're listening to CBC Radio 2 Drive. Coming up next, I'll tell you how the Jockey Company is making life a little easier and more comfortable for women. It's right after this one from Ben Gibbard with Amy Mann. Here's Bigger Than Love.
It's bigger than love.
Minister Edmund Bagrouche, there are too many demonstrators demanding too many things.
We try to understand what the message is, but there's not one single message.
The next move belongs to Turkey's Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's still out of the country on a state visit, but he returns home tomorrow, and everyone is waiting to see if he'll soften his stance toward the protesters or keep up his hard line against them. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Istanbul.
Canada's food processing plants are going to have to be ready for spot checks. The federal government is beefing up Canada's food inspection system, creating new safety teams. The move follows an independent review after that E. coli outbreak at a plant in Brooks, Alberta in September. 18 people got sick after eating infected meat. Aaron Collins has more.
The report's authors are clear. Government inspectors didn't do enough to prevent E. coli from getting into beef at XL's Lakeside plant. And when it did, they didn't do enough to stop its spread. But despite that, Agriculture Minister Jerry Ritz insists the recall was an isolated incident.
The report made clear that Canada's food safety system remains among the best in the world. Everyone in the supply chain, from farm gate to kitchen plate, has a role to play in protecting food safety.
But the strongly worded report also indicated that food inspectors at XL had dropped the ball, failing to implement mandatory procedures and being a part of a system that didn't create a strong food safety culture at the plant. And the government's response to create a new level of inspectors to essentially monitor those already in place with spot checks of facilities across the country.
Well, this is adding another layer of rigor. The nature of the inspection verification teams will be the final backstop against that type of lethargy setting in.
It's a move that Jim Laws of the Canadian Meat Council supports.
Obviously, something went seriously wrong at Establishment 38, XL Foods, and this will help to put uniformity into the system right across Canada. That is a good thing.
But it's not enough, according to Malcolm Allen, the NDP's agriculture critic. He says the Conservative government needs to do a complete audit of the country's food safety system.
They still don't really know if that system works, and now we're going to get spot checkers roaming the country trying to see why the system isn't working from a system that they never tried to prove would work in the first place. So it really is a damning indictment.
The University of Manitoba's Rick Hawley agrees.
Absolutely nothing I have heard would give me confidence that the food coming out of plants is going to be safer now than it was an hour ago.
Hawley, a food science professor, says another level of inspectors isn't needed. He says the inspectors already in place simply need to be properly trained.
Why wouldn't you do that in the first place? Instead of having a team to go around and investigate whether or not the inspection staff is doing its job. You should know that before you ever put them out there.
In total, the report makes 30 recommendations, including improved training of inspectors. For its part, the government says it'll implement all 30. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
This is Cass Rusi in Toronto. It's among the most widely prescribed drugs in the world, a modern wonder. But are the wrong people taking it?
The benefit seems to be pretty small when you look at it for primary prevention. I know people who would absolutely not take it for that benefit, and I know people who definitely would.
I'll have that story later on The World at 6.
One person is dead and 13 injured after a 4-story building collapsed in downtown Philadelphia. It toppled onto a Salvation Army thrift store where people were shopping. This eyewitness describes what he saw.
The building was like, it had really big aftershock on the ground. You felt it shake. There was people that actually fell over. People started screaming. They ran across the street. There was people inside the building. You heard them scream. And then we went over to the building. We said, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Say something.
Workers had been preparing the building for demolition when it collapsed. City officials say all of the proper permits were in place. Some of the biggest names in Major League Baseball are now being tracked down by the league in connection with a massive doping scandal. After a probe lasting months into a Miami clinic linked to performance-enhancing drugs, the owner has now agreed to cooperate with investigators. So the league now has a client list and is aggressively pursuing at least 20 players. As Peter Armstrong reports, it could soon start handing out the largest number of suspensions the game has ever seen.
And he hits that one high and deep to left. Just another day at the ballpark in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Brewers staged a late-game rally to beat the Oakland A's. But looming over it all, another scandal of performance-enhancing drugs broken by ESPN last night. Milwaukee's Ryan Braun among the 20 players allegedly facing suspension.
I addressed it in spring training. I will not make any further statements about it. The truth has not changed. I don't know the specifics of the story that came out today, but I've already addressed it. I've already commented on it, and I'll say nothing further about it. So.
It, in this case, is a series of allegations centered around a now-closed anti-aging clinic in Miami called Biogenesis of America. The clinic's been linked to performance-enhancing drugs in the past and has a client list of top baseball players. Now, the clinic's founder, Tony Bosch, has reportedly agreed to cooperate with officials and will produce the names of any players he provided drugs to. Among them, one of the biggest names in baseball, New York Yankee Alex Rodriguez.
MLB is handling it, and I will let them handle it.
Yankees general manager Joe Girardi says he's concerned about how many more of these scandals the sport can take.
So, my concern is about the game, and the game being clean, and the game, just being good. And I'd hope that we were through it, but obviously maybe we're not. We're going to find out.
And sure enough, fan reaction is one of entirely predictable frustration. From Milwaukee, home of Ryan Braun. He lied. He lied to every Brewer fan that's out here. He lied. To New York, home of Rodriguez.
It's poor attitude on their part, since so many kids look up to these players.
All told, ESPN says about 20 players are facing suspensions. Some of them could be sidelined for as many as 100 games. Canadian sports lawyer David Goldstein says you have to go back to the single biggest scandal in baseball history to find an equivalent.
I can't think of anything of this size since really the Black Sox, gambled on the World Series as far as a mass group of people punished for although it's not the exact same incident, it's the same scandal.
The heart of this, he says, is cheating. But Goldstein says the good news here is baseball's attempts at cleaning up the sport do appear to be working. Major League Baseball won't comment on the report, but ESPN says formal suspensions could come down in a matter of weeks. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Toronto.
Flooding in Central Europe continues as water levels reach record highs. The army has been deployed to the German city of Halle, where soldiers worked around the clock filling sandbags and piling them along the water. In Dresden, the city square is almost entirely submerged. And according to German media reports, some 10,000 people have already been asked to leave their homes. In Ottawa, a battle is brewing between the federal Conservatives and Elections Canada. The head of the independent agency has asked the Speaker of the House to suspend Conservative MPs Shelley Glover and James Bazan. They are accused of incorrectly reporting their expenses in the last federal election. James Fitzmaurice reports.
Canada's chief electoral officer has quietly toiled away behind the scenes, trying to get the two Conservative MPs to clean up their election expenses. The opposition is taking a more direct approach.
Is the Prime Minister seriously going to allow
the member from Selkirk, Interlake, and from St. Boniface to vote illegally on over $65 billion.
At issue, Elections Canada says the two Conservatives lowballed the value of their recycled campaign signs. The Conservatives say since the signs weren't just for elections, they should only count a portion of the cost as a campaign expense. Elections Canada says the rules are clear. To keep the playing field level, the full cost must be included for everyone. The difference being the lower price keeps the two under the campaign spending limits. The higher one puts them over. The law says if any MP refuses to correct their returns, they are ineligible to continue sitting and voting in the House of Commons. NDP MP Craig Scott is among those asking when the suspensions will begin.
So what is this government going to do to hold these Conservative MPs to account for violating elections law?
Speaking on behalf of the government on all issues relating to disputes with Elections Canada is Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre.
We also know that they acted in good faith, and there is a difference.
He says the two MPs are disputing Elections Canada's interpretation of the law and are taking the agency to court. In the meantime, Poilievre stands by the government's record.
This is the party that passed the Accountability Act. This is the party that banned big money and corporate cash from the political system.
Again, the opposition has a different take. Liberal MP Judy Foote.
Any fisherman in Newfoundland and Labrador will tell you that fish rots from the head down. When will the Prime Minister take responsibility for the scandals in his caucus and on his watch?
Since first forming government, the Conservatives have run afoul of Elections Canada a number of times. From the in-and-out scandal used to illegally hide campaign expenses to robocalls allegedly used to confuse non-Conservative voters. And recently, Cabinet Minister Peter Panashwe resigned after an investigation was launched into alleged illegal campaign donations that may have helped him get elected in the last campaign. James Fitzmaurice, CBC News, Ottawa.
Liberal leader Justin Trudeau announced today that his MPs and senators will publish online details of their travel and hospitality expenses, and he's encouraging others to do the same. Trudeau says the Senate scandal has caused Canadians to lose faith in government and that something must be done to restore it. James Cudmore has that story.
I am proud today to say that the Liberals are once again raising the bar.
Justin Trudeau today proposed a new rules regime for members of the House of Commons.
Alors en français, nous avons 4 éléments.
But as he spoke on the front lawn of the Parliament buildings, a group of young protesters showed up. They chanted and waved signs that said Justin loves the Senate and Trudeau likes the status quo. They refused to offer their names or to say whether they were Conservative Party activists, but it appears they were. Here's the Prime Minister today.
Unlike the Liberal Party, we think the Senate needs to be reformed or abolished. We do not defend the status quo.
We do not defend the status quo, he said. Political shenanigans aside, the Conservative Party was again today rocked onto its back foot. The Prime Minister was forced once more to say what he knew about that $90,000 deal between his former Chief of Staff Nigel Wright and former Conservative Senator Mike Duffy, and whether that deal was offered to anyone else.
At the same time, I did ask Mr. Wright whether he had any similar arrangements or discussed any similar arrangements and had any similar arrangements with other senators, and he said no.
The audit into Pamela Wallen's expenses is ongoing, and the Prime Minister today said he has not been briefed on any of its details. Neither, apparently, has Wallen herself, who today said she didn't know when the audit would be in either. The Senate today continued to debate a Conservative motion to have the Auditor General in to examine its spending from top to bottom. NDP leader Thomas Mulcair pointed out the Senate was audited just last year.
There have been warning signs on this for a long time with regard to the Canadian Senate. The Senate itself ignores them. Why? Because they're unelected and they're unaccountable.
Today, both Liberal and Conservative senators said it would be a good idea for the Auditor General to be called in to audit the House, too. But even there, one Liberal admitted the idea doesn't have a whole lot of merit. James Cudmore, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada has one of the most overvalued real estate markets in the world. That's the finding of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It bases the findings on two measures tracking what homes cost compared to incomes and rents. Canada ranks third in the developed world, just behind Belgium and Norway. On the other end of the scale, the most undervalued real estate is in Japan, Germany, and South Korea. In the U.S., Chrysler is refusing to go along with a recall of more than 2 million Jeeps from as far back as 1993. The U.S. government has asked that some models of the Jeep Grand Cherokee and Jeep Liberty be recalled because their fuel tanks could catch fire in a rear-end collision. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says 51 people have been killed in rear impact accidents involving the two models. But Chrysler insists the vehicles are safe. Justin Berkowitz, an editor for Car and Driver magazine, says Chrysler's defiance is puzzling.
Whether this is the company just having a very rash reaction and an entire company doing so, or Chrysler calculating that it's going to be cheaper to fight this and deal with the public relations backlash, we would assume that that's the math that they've done.
There's no word yet on whether identical Chrysler models in Canada have the same problems. The criminal trial began today for a Toronto police officer at the center of a confrontation during the G20 protests. The officer is charged with assault with a weapon in the now infamous arrest of Adam Nobody. Video of the arrest sparked outrage over the extreme use of force during the 2010 summit. CBC's Lorenda Redekop was in the courtroom today. The Crown played several short videos capturing different angles of the G20 arrest at the center of this case. The protester being taken down is a man who officially changed his name to Adam Nobody. He's seen surrounded by officers. They appear to punch and kick him. Nobody testified that he saw bright lights as he was hit repeatedly in the face. He says they screamed at him, "Stop resisting, stop resisting." He told them that he wasn't resisting. Adam Nobody said all he could move was his head, which he did to try to avoid more blows. He testified that he first went to the protest hours earlier at around 3 p.m., carrying a red bottle filled with Canadian Club whiskey and water. The bottle got knocked out of his hands and ended up at the feet of police. Police later reported finding ethanol in the bottle, which could be flammable. Hours later, after a trip to the beer store and a convenience store, Adam Nobody is seen on video running from police. He says one officer yelled, him, get him." John Bridge shot that video. He was also on the witness stand today. Bridge testified that Nobody was covered in officers and couldn't have moved his arms if he wanted to. The police officer's defense lawyer then tried to discredit Bridge as a witness, painting him as a very good friend of Nobody's. Bridge denied that, says even though he's now Facebook friends with Adam Nobody, they're only acquaintances. And back in 2010, when he shot this video, they'd never met. Later, he said only this to reporters.
The only comment I'd have to make is that I really hope the G20 doesn't have another event in this city again.
Police officers arrested more than 1,100 people that weekend. One officer was recently found not guilty in a separate alleged assault. Babak Andalib Gortani is the only officer still facing charges related to G20 arrests. Ontario's ombudsman referred to the police use of force at the G20 as the biggest compromise of civil liberties in Canadian history. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto. One of the men accused of plotting to derail a Canadian passenger train is hoping to set legal history in this country. Jihad Eshayer says he wants to base his defense on the Quran and not on Canada's criminal code. But as Laura Lynch reports, he's having trouble finding a lawyer who'll take the case on those terms.
Outside a courthouse in downtown Toronto, lawyer Bridie Bethel faces reporters asking questions about Eshayer, questions she can't answer.
I don't know what position the co-accused has taken, and I can't comment on him. He's not my client.
Eshayer isn't her client. Right now, he's not anybody's client. Eshayer has made clear in a series of brief appearances via video link from jail he wants a certain kind of lawyer. The screen in the courtroom shows only his head and shoulders. Facing charges of terrorism, he said a few days ago he cannot find a lawyer who will use the Quran to defend him.
You cannot answer those charges without resorting to law based on man-made Canadian criminal code and Canadian constitutional principles.
Nader Hassan is a criminal defense lawyer and a member of the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association. Not only does he think Eshayer won't find the lawyer he wants, Hassan says the accused is potentially flouting Islamic law.
As a Muslim, I know enough to know that Muslims, whether they live in a Muslim majority country or a majority non-Muslim country, they have an obligation to follow the
law of the state.
One legal historian, Jim Phillips of the University of Toronto, says Canadian criminal courts have always barred requests to import other legal systems, a practice that goes back to the early days of Confederation, when First Nations asked to be tried based on Aboriginal laws.
I don't know of any instance where someone can bring in from outside their kind of personal law and have it applied to them.
Legal aid officials say they're still searching for a solution, but Asire may end up representing himself if he cannot find a lawyer. If that happens, there will likely be more delays in what's already expected to be a complex case. Laura Lynch, CBC News, Toronto.
You're listening to The World at 6 on CBC Radio 1. We're also available online anytime in streaming audio, or you can subscribe to our podcast. That's at cbc.ca/W6. For decades, healthy people have been taking a prescribed drug they may not need because they hope it will reduce their chances of heart attack. And that's made the cholesterol-reducing drugs called statins among the most widely used drugs ever. But as our health reporter, Cass Rusey, reports, recent studies have doctors questioning whether the side effects might outweigh its limited benefits.
62-year-old Jim Matheson is out for his daily walk along a wooded path near his home in Toronto. 5 years ago, his doctor warned him he was on the road to a stroke or heart attack.
When he told me that, I thought, well, I've got an 80% chance of not having a stroke, so I thought those were pretty good odds.
Still, Matheson's doctor suggested a cholesterol-lowering drug, one of the most widely prescribed medications in the world.
Now, I trust my heart to Lipitor.
They go by more popular names like Lipitor or Zocor, but they're known as statins. In Canada, over 30 million prescriptions for these drugs are dispensed every year. And for decades, the drugs have been used to lower cholesterol levels, even in healthy people with slightly elevated cholesterol. Professor Mohammed Mamdani of St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto researches drug safety.
So if we treat the cholesterol levels, and we know the cholesterol levels are associated with a heart attack, then reducing the level will reduce your risk of having a heart attack.
But a debate has been brewing in the medical community as to the pros and cons of statins as preventative medicine. A myriad of studies links statins to side effects like an increase in muscle and joint disease, increased risk of liver dysfunction, or acute kidney injury. James McCormack is a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at UBC. He says prescribing statins to people with heart disease has benefits, but for people who've never had a heart attack or stroke, not so much.
If you look at all of the studies that have ever been done with statins for primary prevention, so for people who've never had, a heart attack or a stroke, if you give a statin to a patient for about 5 years, we can reduce the chance of a person having a heart attack or a stroke by about 1%. So about 1 in 100 people will benefit over a period of 5 years.
Professor Mamdani's own recent study found that prescribing statins also increased the chance of diabetes, but
the benefits being reduction in cardiovascular events, the risks being things like diabetes or muscle weakness, and on balance, the benefits outweigh the risks.
In his kitchen, Jim Matheson fixes a morning snack of apples. He never went on statins, opting instead for those other things that prevent heart disease, daily exercise, and a decent diet. Cass Rusey, CBC News, Toronto.
And finally, another look at our top stories tonight. The Syrian army has retaken control of the strategic town of Qusair near the border with Lebanon. The town's capture solidifies some of the Syrian regime's recent gains on the ground and shifts the balance of power toward President Bashar al-Assad. And Ottawa says it will spend nearly $16 million to hire and train more federal food inspectors. That's our program for Wednesday, June the 5th, The World at 6. From CBC News, I'm Allison Smith. Have a good night.
6:30. Good evening. I'm Robert Fisher with the CBC News Update. A Liberal email scandal at Queen's Park has touched off an opposition frenzy with calls for heads to roll, jail time, even a provincial election. But Premier Kathleen Wynne says things changed when she became Premier.
From the moment that I have been in this office, Mr. Speaker, we've been following all of the rules in terms of retention of documents, Mr.
opposition smells political blood and will be after the Premier and the Liberal government, likely tomorrow again in question period. Mayor Rob Ford on a walkabout during the day with events across the city saying it's business as usual for him, again ignoring questions about allegations of drug use. The provincial government announcing fewer spots in teachers' colleges in Ontario, and the Jays beat the Giants 4-0 in San Francisco this afternoon.
The weather forecast for Toronto and Hamilton tonight, mainly cloudy. Slight chance of showers overnight, the low near 12. Thursday showers, gusty winds from the east in the morning, the high 14. For Niagara, partly cloudy tonight, gusty northeast winds, the low near 13. Thursday showers, windy, the high near 17. And for Peterborough and the Kawarthas tonight, cloudy. Slight chance of showers overnight, the low near 9. Thursday cloudy, showers, the high near 12.
Should we make the rich pay? The month debates posed that very question, lining up for the cons, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich and Reagan economic advisor Arthur B. Laffer. On the pro side, New York Times columnist Paul Krugman and former Prime Minister of Greece George Papandreou. The month debates. Be it resolved, tax the rich more. Tonight on Ideas at 9:30 in Newfoundland.
Hello, I'm Carol Off.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Douglas, and this is As It Happens. Tonight,
mulling a mulligan, I'll speak with Senator David Tkachuk about accusations that he whitewashed the original report on his colleague Mike Duffy's expenses and what he'll do differently this time.
Going back would be a miscalculation. In April, prominent Russian economist Sergei Guriev left Russia fearing imprisonment. Tonight, he'll tell us why even an invitation from Vladimir Putin won't change his mind.
In cold blood, an American soldier pleads guilty to the massacre of 16 Afghan civilians in 2 villages. A journalist who spent time with the survivors tells us what she's learned.
I think, therefore I animate. Researchers with the University of Minnesota managed to maneuver a remote-controlled helicopter using only their minds.
Well, no one said it would be ici. That is until today, when the CBC's French language service, Radio Canada, announced that its new name was finally here. Literally, it's ici, which means here.
And it turned joysticks into despair sticks. Legend has it, 30 years ago, Atari's E.T. game was so badly received that the company buried millions of copies in a New Mexico landfill. Now a Canadian company is digging them up. As it happens, the Wednesday edition, radio that rarely gets the dirt off a story. David Tkachuk thought his work was complete. Barely a month ago, the Conservative chair of the Senate's Internal Economy Committee tabled a report on Mike Duffy's expenses. His boss, the government's leader in the Senate, congratulated Senator Tkachuk and said it was case closed. Well, the case is back open. Turns out Senator Duffy's bogus expenses had been paid off by none other than the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Senator Tkachuk and his committee have been asked to take a second look, and that earlier report has made Senator Tkachuk himself tired of accusations. We'll reach Senator Tkachuk in Ottawa.
Senator Tkachuk, while I was preparing to speak with you today, I noted as I went through the clippings that the shorthand in Ottawa for your report on Senator Duffy is now the Whitewashed Report. And you are the author of the Whitewashed Report.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well,